Hello, my friend. Welcome to another episode of the Dads Making a Difference podcast. My name is Cam. I'm your host. And over the last several months, we've been diving into conversations about fatherhood, being a husband, and faith. And before you turn this off, if you're not a Christian guy, you're not into faith, please hear me out. Here's the importance of this conversation today. See, personally, I have struggled with this over the last several months. I've struggled with what it means to be a present and active, intentional husband, an intentional father, and being intentional in my faith, which you guys know if you've been listening to this, I'm fairly new to returning to. And I'm learning a lot and I'm reading a lot and I'm trying to understand, but I'm really trying to understand how my faith influences my fatherhood journey. And as I've navigated this, I knew that there was one guy that I needed to bring on to the podcast to talk about this. And that guy is Larry Hagner. I appreciate Larry. Larry is a past guest. Larry is the founder of the Dad Edge and the Dad Edge Alliance Mastermind Group. He is also host of the Dad Edge podcast, which, by the way, at this time is the number one dad podcast across all platforms, which is pretty cool. Larry's a pretty cool guy, though. And Larry has a new book. His book is called The Spirit of Fatherhood. And when I saw this, I knew I had to have Larry on because this book is a testament to the transformative power of vulnerability and divine intervention. In this conversation, I asked Larry some questions about what was the journey like in writing this book, a book that you were asked to write, that you never had planned to write. And in that journey, Larry shares some of the experiences he has, some twists of fate, some profound moments, and specifically a moment he had in the middle of an extreme health scare at the beginning of writing this book, where his son walks in on him weeping, where Larry felt his lowest. And I think Larry shares this not to say, well, it's me, listen to this, but because we have all been there where we don't know how to react. And it's easy for us to put up walls, but in that moment, instead of putting up a wall, Larry made the decision as a man and as a father to open up. And I want you and I to be able to do the same thing. So, Larry's going to share some keys in this conversation on how we can open up and be intentional as fathers. In his book of Spirit of Fatherhood, he does the exact same thing. He gives you strategies that you can use to implement faith in fatherhood. And if you're not a Christian guy and if you're not into faith, it's a good read because it's going to help you become a better dad. And that's why we're here. I'm excited for this conversation, excited for you to dive in. I think episode 111 on the Dads Making Difference podcast with Larry Hagner starts right now. Larry Hagner, welcome back to the Dads Making a Difference podcast. Always a pleasure to speak with you, man.
What's up, brother? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We were
Good.
just talking a little bit before we pressed record about, some of the life's idiosyncrasies, those things that come together that sometimes are hard conversations, easy conversations. But I appreciate you asking. You're always a thoughtful guy and really dive into men. And I love that the first question you asked me is like, how are you doing? When I'm just excited to have you here to talk about some of the work that's going on in your world with the Dad Edge, with the new book coming out. For the guys who are listening to this, Larry was on the podcast back on episode 45, and we talked about being a legendary dad. And if you haven't listened to that, you're going to listen to this conversation and you're going to go back, re-listen to that. It's going to give you some context for our conversation today. So, Larry, man, good to see you. Why don't you give us an update? What is going on in the world of the Dad Edge and Larry Hagner right now?
Well, my friend, so we are, as you and I are recording right now, it's the middle of April, and my book, The Spirit of Fatherhood, is coming out. There's a pre-order, May 28th.
Amazing.
And the big launch will be Father's Day. So
Great
it's
time.
yeah, it's been really crazy, man. I think I'm happy to talk about the book, and but I think what might be even more telling would be like the fascinating journey of writing the book, because it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy.
So you've written books before, like in the past, you wrote books, some short, some long. And I have friends who are authors who've written books before, and they're like, this is something I would never want to do again. And so as you're doing this, as you're going on this journey, as you've been an author in the past, and what made you say, hey, I want to sit down, I want to write another book. I want to put this together.
I wasn't actually, which
Yeah.
is kind of the funny part of the journey. So, I actually, it was really fascinating, just, how God works, I think. And I talk about this because I really didn't form a relationship with God until and Christ until 2020.
Mm,
And up until then, like I had been sort of like in and out, like a box checker. I pray, but I was kind of like more of a genie in the bottle when it came to God. Like I'll be like, I pray when I really need something. Otherwise, I really didn't have this really great relationship with him. And in 2019, I was invited by a spiritual mentor to go on a journey of 2 years.
mm,
Not a journey, but like a journey of a mentorship. And it was everything was virtual, so it was called Operation Timothy. It was 2 year mentorship, and he just guided me through three different books, and we had to study. We met every other Thursday, every other Wednesday for an hour and a half, and I really just built this relationship with God, and like truly for once in my life, after like 40 something years, understood the Bible, and it was
mm,
fascinating. But so that was kind of like how the journey started with my faith. And I had talked about my faith just sort of loosely in the podcast and the movement and the mission of Dad Edge, but I really wasn't upfront with it. And now I'm upfront with it. And here's the other thing too, guys that come and do life with us, like I don't discriminate against guys who don't have faith or they don't believe
yeah.
in that. That's that's their journey and that's fine. It's a part of mine. It's not a part of everybody's. But I'm also open about it as well. So,
Mm,
but how this whole thing happened, which is really fascinating. So I wrote another book called The Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood that was supposed to actually launch in September of 2022. Had a publisher behind me in the whole nine yards. And then 6 weeks before the launch of that book, the publisher went bankrupt. And
oh,
I
what?
was like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen? So I met with the CEO and he's like, hey man, he's like, yeah, so here we have two options. I can either help you self-publish this book, and it was all done, like everything
Yeah.
edited, design, cover, inside, outside, endorsements, whole night, everything was done. And he's like, I can either help you self-publish this, or I'll just sign over the rights to you. And I had never gone through a real publisher before, so I'm like,
Right.
just sign me over the rights. I'm going to shop this book. So he signed me over the rights. I hired an agent, and she went shopping for publishers. And we had several meetings with publishers, and I just couldn't get the deal that I truly wanted. And then Morehouse came along, which is a publishing company, and they met with me, and they're like, "Yeah, we like your book, but we want you to write another one first." And I'm like, "What?" I was like, "What are you
Mm,
talking about?" They're like, "We want you to write a book. We already know what it's going to be called. It's called The Spirit of Fatherhood. We want you to write it. We've actually been watching your work for a long time, and we think you're the guy to write this book." And I'm like, "Spirit of
mm.
Fatherhood, like, well, what is this about?" And they're like, it's a faith-based, Christian-based approach to fatherhood. And I just laughed. I was like, and I'm on a
You got
call
the
with,
wrong guy. No,
that's exactly what I said. That's exact. I
yeah.
said, you got the wrong guy.
Yeah.
And I just laughed. I was like, you got the wrong guy, man. And they laughed and I laughed. And I was like, no, seriously, I'm not qualified to write a book like that. And they're like,
Yeah.
no. That's actually why we want you to write the book. And I'm like, what
Mm,
do you mean? They're like, we know you're new to your faith, and we know that, you're a student of this. And that's the way we want you to write the book. And I'm like, well, I can do that. Like
yeah.
that I can do. Right.
Yeah.
So I sat in front of this blank, computer screen, and I was completely, I had so much writer's block. I wasn't even funny. Like I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't know where to start. And, but I wrote the joke was this. I said, okay, so when do you all want, this was back in September, August ish I'm sorry, it was September of 2022. I was like, well, when do you want to launch the book? And they said Father's Day. I was like, oh, okay, great. So like y'all, I can
2025.
write, yeah, like I have to like March, right? And they're like, no, we actually need it done in 11 weeks. And I'm like, what? I was like, 11 weeks. I was like, it took me a year to write Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. They're like, yeah, we know it's a tight deadline, but we need you to write it that fast. And I'm like,
Wow.
oh my gosh, like what the heck? Like, so,
Yeah.
but I said yes to it.
Okay.
And I did it. I did it actually. I've got it done 9 days early. And yeah, and now it's launching. I mean, there's a lot of things in there that I
Yeah.
experienced while writing the book, but that's how it happened. So it was kind of a fluke.
That's crazy, man. I got two questions from what you
Yeah.
just shared. First, I just want to ask you about that piece of being new and I'm learning because I love it because you're coming at this and you're an author, but you're also coming at it through a lens of growth and learning like this is where I'm at in my life. I don't know it all. This is where I'm at with my spirituality. I don't know it all. And I think that in itself is enticing to guys who might be listening to this, who might be also new or on the fence. For that piece of it, I got to assume that there's some imposter syndrome. You're writing this book and you feel like you're just putting your thoughts and feelings and your beliefs out on paper. And then you're like, oh, wait, is that accurate? Like, am I right? Like, did you go through that at all?
I still am.
Yeah.
And the book's
No,
done.
that's good. Yeah.
And
I think that's
but
healthy.
the funny thing is this is that there were a lot of elements in the book that I wrote sort of in past tense that I have been doing, right?
Okay.
But I also wrote a lot of things in the book that I was becoming as I was writing the book.
Mm,
So, which was kind of a really fascinating journey because, like, as I put pen to paper, it really, like, I mean, there's something really magical that happens when you write like your own mission statement, right? Suddenly, like, it's like, okay, this becomes really, really real. And these are no longer just, this is not just an idea anymore or something I think should be cool. This is the way that I live. And that's, as I wrote that book, I was like, this is the way I need to be living. And quite frankly, I mean, there's still some elements in that book. I'm still like I'm getting my arms wrapped around it, right? Like praying with my kids. I pray with my kids, but like there's still a part of me that kind of feels awkward at times, like, but I'm like, you know what? I put pen to paper and I said that I was gonna do this and I'm gonna do it, even if it feels weird and awkward. And that's okay
yeah.
because I'd rather do it than not do it. And plus, like, I'm sitting there thinking, man, I really like put a stamp of like, this is going to be a huge part of my life.
Hmm.
And by writing this book, it needs to be a huge part of my life. And I would say writing that book was like, I mean, the journey really started when I went through Operation Timothy, but really writing this book, man, it really solidified like, this is the way that I'm going to live.
Mm,
And, it's been a fascinating journey, but yeah, imposter syndrome to the nth degree.
yeah. Now, as a dad and a husband, you're going through this. You have 11 weeks, you said,
Yeah.
in that window. What did you learn about yourself, time management, being present as a husband, as a father through this? Because I can only imagine the amount of work and intention that it takes to write a book. And you're also a guy who I know, and if you're listening to this, you got to check out Larry's stuff. Like you are intentional about the pursuit of being a strong husband and a strong father. Live legendary. Like that's what you do. And here you have this deadline, this imposing deadline, boom, 11 weeks. This is what we are dictating you are focusing on for the next 11 weeks. How did you navigate that?
I had some help
Yeah.
and it wasn't welcomed.
Mm,
I'll tell you what happened. So like um as soon as I used to believe in spiritual warfare. I believe in spiritual warfare. I didn't believe in it to the degree that I experienced it though during the writing process of this book. And I'll explain to you. So like I told you that when I inked the contract of this book, I was like, okay, I got to write this book. And I sat in front of my computer and I literally was like, I'm not the guy for this. Like I'm just not. Like that was what's going through my head. And I literally almost emailed the publisher back and been like, I'm not, I can't, this is not, I can't do it.
yeah.
And then something fascinating happened. So I'm a big fitness guy. Anybody who knows me and follows me know that fitness is a huge part of my life. It's the thing that keeps me sane. It is my therapy. It is my mental health. It is my emotional health. It is my physical health. It is
Mhm.
my way of de-stressing. It is foundational to me and how I live. And the week after I inked that book, I injured myself horrifically, and I didn't even know how bad I did. So I was doing a workout with my oldest son, felt a little bit of a twinge in my knee, didn't think much of it. Later that day, it swelled up real bad, and I'm like, huh, that's kind of weird. And it's like my knee is really swollen. Well, over time, it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And when I say worse, constant chronic pain. I've never had chronic pain. I have a whole new respect for people with chronic pain. I couldn't bend my leg right. I couldn't walk right. I couldn't go up and down stairs. And this went on for like 7 weeks.
Mm,
And I was taking ibuprofen. I was icing it. I was like literally everything revolved around trying to get this thing back up and running again. And I was like, man, maybe I tore something. Got an MRI. Nothing torn. It, like everything came back clean. And I was like, what is happening here? But in that process, I had no other choice but to sit down and
mm,
write that book because
yeah.
I couldn't really be active. So I literally had time like to do it. And I think that God had a hand in that because he's like, you ain't gonna write this book unless I take something away from you.
Mm.
And you're not going to write this book in the way that needs to be written unless I strip a few things from you that you think you value so much. And he did that. And I was like, and he took my, like my number one therapeutic thing away. And I think it was on purpose. And so I went as I wrote that book and I was going through that stuff because my knee was actually way worse than I thought.
Mm.
So I found out 7 weeks into this thing that my knee wasn't swollen from like synovial fluid, like after an injury. My knee had been bleeding internally for 7 weeks. It was
Shoot.
bleeding in the joint and wouldn't
Mm.
stop.
Yeah.
I didn't know that until I went to an orthopedic surgeon. Finally, after 7 weeks, I'm like, I gotta go to an orthopedic surgeon. Went to an orthopedic surgeon. He's like, oh, wow, that's not good. Let me drain that. Drains it. Like two turkey basters full of blood came out of that knee. I was like, is that blood? He's like, and I used to be in medical device sales, and I know blood in a joint is not good.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, what does that mean? He's like, I don't know, man. He's like, your MRI shows there's no tears. I don't know what's going on with your knee. He's like, we need to test you for like blood disorders and bone cancer. And I'm like,
Oh
what?
man. Yeah.
And so, like, literally, my mental health went from like somewhat good to just absolutely horrific. And then I went on Google and I'm searching, like, I mean,
Dr. Google.
Dr. Google tells me I might lose my leg, like things
Getcha.
like that I'm seeing. And at this point, my mental health had literally taken a downturn. My physical health went way down, I was depressed. I gained a bunch of weight, and I'm like, not a bunch of weight, but I gained like 15 pounds. And I just was in and it wasn't just that. The spiritual warfare not only was after me, but we went through crazy things as a family. I went through even crazy things within Dad Edge. Like I had to remove team members because they were toxic and cancerous and like had to do that as well. So that was crazy. Like I'm going through all of these things in this super compact short window of 11 weeks.
Mhm.
But yet it was crazy because when I would sit down and write, it came from like this super raw, stripped away, nothing to hide
Yeah.
part of who I was. And I really think that that was like the spiritual part of who I was as a man.
Yeah.
And and that was the craziness and here's the weird thing too, man. I got done with that book on November 15th. I had surgery on my knee on November 20th.
Hmm.
And that was finally, and the doc was like, hey, I think we took care of it. It's going to take you like 4 or 5 months before you're
Yeah.
really doing anything like you want to do, but I think we got it taken care of. Basically, what happened was I ruptured a membrane in my knee and it just bled out, just kept bleeding. So luckily it was something minor, but it just kept bleeding.
Wow. Yeah.
And so that was the that was the place I wrote that book from.
Which in itself speaks to the journey and the impactful nature that I think this book is going to have. You said it. I think God put you through a little bit of a trial there to make you more intentional, more, remove the filter a little bit. I bet there was times you sat down and you're like, you know what? F it. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to say what I'm thinking. I'm going to say what's on my heart and what's in my mind. I'm in this state right now. And I think that authenticity and that realness will shine through this book for sure.
Yeah.
Guys don't need another powder puff coating of here's what it means to be a dad. Here's what's important. They need like real stuff, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. I mean, and this one, like I said, it's really written from that. I mean, we in that book, there's a lot of elements that are covered, everything from like a new dad, like what's going through your mind, like first time you're like literally the first chapter starts with like you're like minutes away from having your first kid and you're like, oh my gosh, like
Here we go.
what is about to happen? Like,
Yeah.
and it's not like, it's the excitement, but it's also like, oh wow, this is uncharted territory,
Yeah.
right? And the next 18 years and actually the rest of my life is going to be interesting. It's going to be different. And it's not going to be what I've always known.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just about me and it's not just about me and my wife anymore, my partner anymore. It's like, here I am. We made
Yeah.
this little human. Here they are. And
Yeah.
I remember that first time, man. My daughter's my oldest. And when Kim's water broke. We were on the way to the hospital. I remember that feeling, that anxious, like excitement, but also nothing we planned for and they told us was going to happen actually happened. And I just remember that. And at the end of it, that 12-hour, I don't want to call it an ordeal, but that 12-hour experience when that first time when my daughter had her hand on my pinky, this tiny little hand, man, it just all sunk in. I was like, oh, wow, life is different now. Like you get through it and you just feel it. Larry, why do guys need to pick up this book? Like, what are you seeing from the men that you're interacting with? You're like, this is gonna be helpful or challenging to push you in the right direction.
I think this book is it, I think it's really for a guy who is uncertain about like, well, where where is my relationship with God?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And not from like a I don't know if you ever listened to Jelly Roll. He's like a country singer, but he's also kind of a rapper. It's like country rock, but I love some of his music, but he's got this song called The Lost, and it's all about like you'd be surprised where I found Jesus. It's not necessarily in these beautiful buildings of preachers and who are trying to pour gasoline on my soul and fear into my heart of do this or else. I think the book is more written like that. It's more of an invite to something, to invite to a heavenly father that you may or may not know, and the worthiness that quite frankly we all have and we all have access to, because that was actually my biggest roadblock. I just talked about this on another podcast that one of my biggest roadblocks of my faith is like, well, I'm a sinner and I've done bad things and I will probably continue to do bad things. And like, how or why could I ever be forgiven? And even if I ask for forgiveness and I continue to do bad things, why would I ever be forgiven? And what I really found through my study and even writing that book is that is not the way, that's not the relationship God wants with us.
Right.
In fact, if you really think about it, God wants a relationship with us much like we want a relationship with our kids. We would not like if our kids came to us and said, "Hey, Dad," like if one of your kids came to you and say, "Dad, I'm just not worthy of your love. I'm not worthy to be around you. I'm not worthy of your forgiveness because I'm a human being because I keep doing something wrong." I mean, what would you say? I'm
Right.
curious. What would you say?
Yeah, what did I say? I said, I love you no matter what.
Exactly. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So why would our heavenly Father be any different? And here's what I'll tell you, man. Like, and you know this, and so do I. Guys go at this whole thing of fatherhood and husbandry, and if that's even a word, I'm making words up now. But like, we go at this marriage thing and this father thing and this life thing, thinking that we have to do it all by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, we don't even feel that we're worthy of something like that. And God, all the while, is like, man, just come home.
Mm-hmm.
Like, of course you are. Like, come on, man.
Right.
Like, I love you. Like I love you. I love your kids. Like, don't go with this alone. Let me help you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the invite that I think this book really helps men with, is that relationship with God. But more importantly, I think it's this too. My my nudge to faith really came when my kids started asking me questions that I didn't know the answer to.
Yup.
And
Yup.
that, yeah, and that nudge was, I'm sitting here thinking like, if I don't know this stuff,
Yeah.
are they, number one, who are they going to learn it from? Or are they even going to learn it? So I better have this thing. I better understand it better myself so I can lead them. So the book is also written for a man like that, who's
Mm-hmm.
like, you know what, this is bigger than me. And I'm the leader in my home. I'm also the spiritual leader in my home. And you know what? I don't know exactly what that looks like.
Yeah.
This book will give you a bit more of a roadmap of what that could look like.
Yeah. Well, you've just convinced me when you just said that about being asked questions that you don't know the answer. I'm like, oh, I need to read this book 100% because there's this piece of, I don't know for you, Larry, but for me, a guy who walked away from the church for 18 years and didn't go back until my daughter came up one Sunday morning in a dress and said, "Are we going to church today?" And I was like, where did this come from? I guess we're
Yeah.
going,
Yeah.
and with the anxiety of walking back. Um, when my kids ask me questions like that, I almost feel this little bit of guilt that I don't know the answer. But then I also feel like this is important for them to know the answer. So why isn't it important for me to know the answer? like inside, I know I have to share this with them. And yet I don't have the knowledge base and the background in order to share this. So we're going to do this together.
Yes.
And that's been a fascinating journey for my daughter. My daughter bought me a new Bible for Christmas
Look at
and
that.
a notebook to keep my morning devotional notes in.
What? Look at
And
that,
so,
dude.
and that was, that's what put me on this trajectory of like, this is super important for me, for my family, for being a father, for being a Christian man, for being a leader in all the in my community and in my family. Like, man, being a dad is what pushed me back to my faith. And I can
Yeah.
see that in what you're sharing. And I appreciate you being open and honest about that. Of
Can I share a story and also a reflection real quick?
course.
So I think you nailed it there. Like I used to feel like the major imposter syndrome when like, oh man, well, if I don't have the answers, then like I'm just less than. That's not true.
No.
Like if
Mm,
there are several questions that my kids have about faith, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know.
yeah.
You know, let's go figure it out. You know what? Let's research it. Let's go talk to our pastor. I don't know. That's a great question. I would like to know the answer to that. Let's go learn together. It's really okay to learn together. I think that's part of servant leadership. A leader doesn't necessarily have to know all the answers. A leader can lead the person who has the question as well as the leader who has the question to the people who has the answers.
Right.
Right. So there's that reflection. But here's an interesting story. I wrote about this in the book that when you're and like listen, like you know me and I'm about as transparent as they come.
Yeah.
I have I fall on my face with this a lot with my kids, but the thing is I keep trying. And sometimes I get these golden moments of like, wow, like, well, maybe this effort really isn't going, it's not we're making progress, right? So I'll give you an example. Like I pray, like I said, I pray with my kids. I watched The Chosen with my oldest son. He loves it. Um, and one night, this was right when I was in the heat of like all this, and I was like, I think I was like, it's like the beginning of November. I just had my knee drained for the third time. It was just, it was bleeding. I couldn't walk. I was on crutches. I couldn't bend my leg, and I was outside on the deck with my son, my oldest, and he asked me an interesting question. He's like, "What's one thing you admire about me?" And my head was a mess. Like I was like just I was so overwhelmed. And at the time, like I thought my leg was in way more serious trouble than I thought. And I was like, honestly, Ethan, I said, your curiosity around your faith is something I admire so much. I was like, just I love the questions you have. I love that you're a prayerful person. I love that we have conversations around it. And you're 18 years old and it's not even on 18-year-olds' radar. I was like, for the most part, it wasn't even on mine. I was like, but yet you're so curious about it. I just love that about you, your curiosity and your search and your journey for it. And he's like, oh, I appreciate that. And I was like, hey, if you don't mind, I was like, I'm gonna go lay in bed. At that point in time, I was going to bed a lot, going in the room a lot because like I was in chronic pain, and the only thing that made me feel better was to lay on my back.
Mhm.
And I went in the bedroom and I started Googling things about my knee. And that's when I came, it was that night I came across that like people were talking about like how they had this horrible thing with their knee and it was bleeding internally. They couldn't get it to stop. And, you know, amputations from the knee down. And I was like, oh my God, like what am I in
Mm.
for here? I started thinking about things like, what's my life going to be like with one leg? How am I going to have sex with my life with one leg? If she's going to think I'm attractive with one leg, like I'm sitting here thinking about sex positions with one leg that's going to be impossible for me to even do. I know it sounds crazy, but it was like
No. Yeah.
it was
You spiral.
horrible. And so I come my son comes in the bedroom and I'm crying
Mm.
and not sobbing or anything, but tears rolling down. And as soon as he walked in, I'm like doing this, in my face. And he's like, hey, are you crying? And I'm like, no, man, I'm fine. Yeah, I just kind of like, he's like, you are. And I was like, no, no, I'm fine. I was like, just, I'm fine. And he goes, Dad, you are. And I'm like, I'm scared, man. I was like, I'm reading all this stuff, Ethan. I was like, I don't
Mhm.
know what's going to happen, dude. I was like, I'm freaking out. I was like, and my son is sitting on the edge of the bed. This kind of like makes my eyes well up with tears just talking about. It. He's sitting on the edge of the bed, almost like I'm the kid and he's the dad. And he goes, Dad, he goes, can I pray for you right now? And I was like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, and there's a part of me that's like, no, I'm good. Like I wanted to say that
Yeah.
just as a guy. And I'm like, And there was something in me is like, no, 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 don't do that. Right. Like allow that, just be vulnerable for crying out loud. Right.
Mhm.
And I'm like, yeah, that would be awesome if you don't mind. And he took my hand and he closed his eyes and he prayed. And dude, if I have ever felt the Holy Spirit in a room, it was that night. It was almost like watching him pray with his eyes closed. As I looked up at him, I was like, this is what I saw. And I wrote about this in the book. I didn't see my son in that moment.
Mhm.
I saw the dad that that man is going to be to his kid. And I literally got to experience it as if I was his kid. And that was the whole process of writing the book was interesting and really hard. But if that one moment was worth all of that, it was worth it.
Yeah.
Like experiencing that from that viewpoint.
Powerful stuff, man. Powerful stuff. Larry, man, I appreciate you because every time that I've been able to connect with you, the few times that we've chatted, and when I hear you connect with others, it's always through a lens of like meaningful connection and transparency and this honesty that's just inherent to you that I think speaks as a model to other men to be with their kids, to be with their families. And I appreciate you for that. So thank you.
Thank you back, man. And thanks for what you're doing with your podcast. I know you do this from your heart. And we need more guys out there doing this, out there fighting this fight. Because I really think the world would. I mean, Meg Meeker said it best. She said,
Mhm.
if there was a man underneath the roof of every home and every family, the world would change overnight.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Larry, if guys want to get their hands on this book, learn more about you, hear more about it, where can they do that?
So I think the book is going to be available May 28th on Amazon, and then a full launch on Father's Day. So if you just Google Spirit of Fatherhood or just my name on Amazon, it should come right up. The Dad Edge is where you can find me, thedadedge.com. You can download the podcast anywhere you download podcasts. I think I've got 1,200 episodes under my belt, so that should give you like at least 1,500 hours of content if you're busy or
Yeah.
a traveling person.
Yeah. Amazing. Larry, I appreciate you. Thank you for taking time away from your family this evening. And I wish you the best with the launch, with the book, and of course, raising your family and being an amazing husband.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you having me on, man.